When I decided to talk about this topic, because metrics are not the most exciting topic in the world. In fact, whenever I think of them, I get an immediate visceral reaction of like, oh, you know, horrible things, horrible things. But it turns out they have a huge influence on what we're building and even why we're building it. So when I started putting together the talk, I thought about what is it we're actually measuring at the moment. So I did a little search. You know, you start looking up Agile metrics and waterfall metrics and all these software metrics. And of course, we come up with all these things like the amount of story points we can deliver, our velocity, function points, how fast we're burning things down. And they seem to fit into two categories. One were the outputs, which were how many features, how many stories we delivered, and function points. And the other one was how fast we delivered them. So things like how fast our velocity is, etc. And this is kind of interesting because we all go after and we pretty much game the system. And if our goal is to deliver more faster, that's what we're going to do at a rapid rate. So if all we do is deliver more faster, that means we're going to start taking, it's like the equivalent of a machine gun to product development. We start shooting, we think we know the target, but we're just going to take lots and lots of bullets, and eventually we might hit the target. But there also could be a lot of innocent bystanders that we kill, and it's pretty wasteful. It also causes a lot of product complexity. I found this slide the other day, which is kind of amusing. So you can imagine someone in marketing like, oh, I've got this great idea for our remote control. Let's get all the remote controls in the market, figure out all the different buttons they have, and we'll package it up in one. And that's going to be the one remote control to rule them all. Other people decided otherwise. Anyone flying in and around the conference afterwards? You might want to unhear this. But if you think about it, every line of code you build has the possibility to have defects. A client I was working with in healthcare said, you know, now we've started moving towards outcomes, we've stopped building a lot of the outputs. Before it was all about measuring the amount of features we delivered. And she said, it's interesting because now we deliver about 42% of what we used to. And for us, every line of code introduces the probability of some amount of defects, and those defects literally kill people. So she said, we prefer this way of working because we don't kill as many people, which made me feel kind of weird, maybe good. And what we're trying to do is get away from this thinking, but it turns out all of our systems and everything around it are gauged towards this output and throughput type measure. So why do you think we actually measure these things? What's going on? Why measure these kind of strange things that don't tell us how much value is delivered? They just tell us how much stuff we got out, how quickly. Why do we do it? It's easy. Oh, good. Because it's easy, we should keep doing that over and over again. Why else? There's another reason too.
Money.
You think it's money? Why money? Because why do you think you get more money per feature? I know the marketing people sort of think that, but is it actually true?
Oh, it's not true, but certain people make money by measuring these outputs and optimizing them.
Yeah, that's true. If you're actually a supplier, that would be a really good business model, right? Actually, it's funny you mention that because we were working with a big telco, and we went in there and we looked at what they were building, and it was sort of 2 years into this big project. Turned out that they'd run a competition. So they'd done a selection bidding competition, and they'd gotten down to 3 suppliers. Then they got down to the 2 major ones. And one of them was actually a fairly lightweight, agile type company, and they built this really elegant piece of code. It worked really well, so this was their sort of shortlisting test. And it was really nice, you know, very high quality, very elegant, quite slim, you know, quite thin piece of code they wrote. And the other guys wrote a lot of code fast, so they had lots and lots and lots and lots of feature function points, and actually their quality was pretty bad. So who won the bid? Function points, right? Because, hey, we got lots of stuff. These guys must be great. 2 years in, we then started turning on feature tracking. Like I tell all my clients, make sure you turn on feature tracking. Let's see, which is your features that are actually being used a lot? What percentage of those features were actually being used? Anyone want to take a guess? 10%? Yeah, it tends to be about 5% used a lot. Then it starts diminishing to about 20%, and after that, none of those features have been used. So this supplier has been charging for basically 80% waste to 20% of value delivered, or at least being used. But it got better. So these guys were under an interesting contract model, pretty typical. And what it meant was that they had a 60-day warranty period when they actually delivered the software. In that 60 days, they knew they were going to get the maintenance contract. So what they did is they went in and figured it out how to automate the opening of tickets, and when they fix things, the closing of tickets. So they automated the opening and closing of tickets. The 60-day period ended and they go into the warranty period. These guys got paid £125 for every defect they fixed. So the guys who built it, then automated the opening and closing of tickets, got paid £125 for every defect they fixed. This is a big telco. No one had looked at this stuff. They had between 200 and 1,000 of these tickets every day. It got better. One day my husband, who's a big sort of DevOps guy, he was watching the console and they had a data center outage. So suddenly the systems go offline and he watches as all of these tickets go brrrr, and they get opened up. 20,000 of them. Then maybe someone had tripped over the cord, I don't know, they plugged it back in, systems come up, brrrr, they all close. How cool is that? Right? Here we are trying to make money from building software, and in fact we should be building really bad software and charging to fix it. This is like the most disruptive business model I've come across in the last 2 years. It's fantastic. So when people say, well, you know, do the metrics really matter? They kind of do, right? Because what we're incentivizing is all these terrible, terrible behaviors. And in fact, the one thing we're not measuring are the outcomes, the things that deliver value. Out there, who is actually thinking they're doing a good job of measuring the outcomes and the value delivered? Hands up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to talk to you guys later and see if that's actually true. We're going to have a little meeting afterwards. Out of everybody here, that's kind of crazy, right? The one thing we should be measuring. So when I talk about outcomes, what I'm talking about are the desired results, the things that mean you have succeeded, you've gotten to where you need to go to. Outputs are the steps to get there, and what we want to do is minimize the outputs to reach the outcomes. So these architects, talking about this in different industries, these architects in England were commissioned by a school, and the problem with the school is it was an old Victorian school. It had really narrow corridors. And so they said, guys, we need you to come in and redesign this school. And they said, because we know it's going to cost millions and millions of pounds, but the kids kind of rush out to the corridors, it's kind of dangerous, there's bullying, there's massive congestion, kids get to class late, this is a huge problem for us, please come in and redesign our school. So the architects, instead of just going in and sitting down with a piece of paper and redesigning the school, went and watched what happened. And they noticed that as soon as the school bell went, sure enough, all the doors opened, the kids came out, it was like rush hour traffic, everyone congesting the hallways. And then someone had a novel idea. They said, hey, what happens if we actually don't push the school bell? What happens then? What if we let the teachers let the kids out or time the school bell slightly differently? Sure enough, by doing that, even a minute difference meant the kids came out at slightly different times, so the whole problem was solved for less than £1,000 instead of many, many millions. So it changes the way we think. It's really interesting what happens. I mean, I've been in the Agile space for a long time, and people keep saying to me, you know, it's quite interesting when they want Agile consultants in, they say, you know, we want to do Agile. And I'm like, do you really want to do Agile, or what are you really trying to do? Because there's got to be a problem here. You don't just want to do Scrum because you read about it somewhere. Well, sometimes they do, but anyway. You know, we've got to find out what is the real outcome that's going to change things. I find this a lot when I'm working with clients, and they tell me, come in. I had one client who said to me, hey, we've been doing this Agile stuff, and this was over at Skype in the UK, and they said, we want you to come in and teach us how to write really good user stories. I'm like, sure, tell me what's going on. So they told me a bit about the situation. I said, I think we're going to need 2 days for that. And they're like, wow, must be the best user story workshop for 2 days. You know, we're going to get massive value. I went, yeah, that'll take about half an hour, because that's not actually a problem. So I'll show you why this is the case. There's a really massive push at the moment on focusing on, you know, the old 80-20 rule? 80% of the value comes from 20% of the effort. At the moment, we're really focused on delivery, which according to Capers-Jones, big metrics guy, counts for 30% of the cost. At the moment, the other things that we care about may be deployment and what we're building. We're getting better with deployment and continuous delivery. But these things actually account for 70% of the overall cost, and maybe the value as well. And so everybody's really focused on doing whatever we're doing at a better and better degree. Like, people are really focused on the best user story writing techniques, the best, you know, everything around this conference is about how we run systems faster, better containerization, whatever it is. So actually what we want to do instead is figure out how do we get the huge value rather than trying to make these small things a little bit better. It's that sort of the 80% of effort to create 20% of the value, and that's, I think, where we are as an industry. So let's take a little simple example. So if I say to you, I'm a YOW conference attendee, and you're very happy to be here, and you're out, had a break. I know you actually had champagne, but let's pretend some of you actually had a cup of coffee. So the people who had coffee today, why did you actually have coffee? What's the reason you wanted a coffee? Wake me up, yeah? So I could stay awake? Okay. So you actually wanted to make sure that you were like wide-eyed and excited for all the talks, right? So you wanted a coffee so you could stay awake. And if we're really good at these user story things, we're going to want some tests, some acceptance criteria. So what would be some things you would test for making sure that that coffee story really worked? What was that? You want to measure reaction times. Are you a tester? You want caffeine free? Freak. What else? In your coffee, what do you care about? Do you fall asleep? What else?
Retention. That's what I care about.
Ah, you care about retention. You guys aren't as much fun as my other ones. Usually I get things like, I want milk, I want it to be hot, I want sugar. Let's pretend you said all that. I've probably got like the Uber test crowd here tonight. So I don't usually even get, do I fall asleep or not, let alone retention. So you guys are obviously way ahead of Melbourne and Brisbane. We knew that anyway, right? I used to live in Sydney for 12 years. I'm with you on that. What's that?
Sydney's uptight.
Sydney's uptight. Well, it's because of all the bloody coffee you're drinking. What do you expect? So now someone's given me something about retention. I mean, hopefully not fluid retention, but let's say retention. That's really interesting. Because here we are, and this is what often happens. People go through and they write this really detailed, fantastic test user story, and in fact, you start telling me about retention, so something's going on. So let's say that instead of just staying awake, there was a deeper, meaningful purpose. And maybe that was to actually learn something, because when you say retention, you want to retain something, right? So if we learn it, retention could be a pretty good way to measure that. But what could be some different ways that I want to help you learn? Interaction. Okay. What else? Stories. Once upon a time, there was a YOW developer wanting coffee. Okay. And even let's take that one we had earlier, which was about stay awake. Under that, there can be many, many ways that we could stay awake. For example, interesting. See how we go. We could have those stimulants, right? And under that, you might have caffeine as one branch. And even under caffeine, we could have caffeine tablets. We could have Red Bull, tea, coffee, right? There's lots of things we can actually do. So what we've done is we've actually opened up the options. Right, we've gone from understanding the outcome, now we have many, many options, and that gives us a lot more choice. Because now I can say to my team, hey, one of the things I need to do is keep these people awake, what have you got? And they say, well, for 20 cents, we can go and get you, you know, all these caffeine tablets and give them out. And again, I would try an experiment. Does that actually work or not? And I find out that some people love them, some don't. Some go to sleep anyway because they're impervious to caffeine. Others stay up all night cleaning the house. Then we go through, okay, what else have you got? Oh, maybe we've got Red Bull, a bit more expensive, but maybe better results until it's cold like today. Is the summer, just a tangent, but what was going on with this weather? And now we say we need hot coffee because we want to warm up. And then we get into the types of coffee, right? This is where you start saying, well, there's instant coffee, which we have to debate whether that's actually coffee, all the way to really high quality Wildcat civet coffee. Who's had Wildcat civet coffee before? Is it actually any good? No? Down? Okay, so civet coffee in London costs about £12 a cup. And what it is they get the wildcats of Asia who run around and sniff out the best quality coffee beans. They then eat the coffee beans, process them through the cat factory. They get deposited at the back of the cat factory, they get roasted, and then they get marketed and sold to kind of poor fools who think that the coffee is where it's at. So there's kind of this law of diminishing returns where we say, you know, what's the point that we get the maximum amount of outcome and it starts getting too expensive, and that's where we want to kind of cut that off. So this is what we're doing at the moment. We're really going through and trying to kind of make the wrong things right over and over again. I get into people are worried about complex architectures, and actually it turned out that there was a much simpler solution there if we'd been a lot more outcomes focused. So I want to talk about why we're not doing this at the moment, because I started going out preaching outcomes for a very long time and going, well, it's not sticking. People aren't actually doing it. So why is that? And it turns out it's a little tricky. And so part of it was coming up with a visualization, a simple model to get people started. I know mentioned mobius. So mobius loop, for the math geeks, mobius loop is really an infinity loop, and you keep going around it, because what we often talk about are things like our product roadmaps or our product deployment pipelines, and they're very one way. They're all about, we're going to shove as much stuff out to our users and hope someone out there uses it. We're not actually getting the feedback loop. Many of our processes are very sequential. So if you look at what happens, we're very much stuck on the right-hand side. There's a lot of, let's deliver something and we will inspect and adapt it. And what we haven't really thought through is why are we doing it in the first place? So if we, instead of rushing in, you know, I go in to teach Agile people and they're like, right, yeah, great, let's learn Scrum. I'm like, excellent. And they're like, you learn a bit about Scrum, and I'm like, right, let's go and do it. And I'm like, what are you building? Don't know. I'm like, really? And they're like, yeah, but we're like Agile, and we're going to just figure it out as we go along. Awesome, right? This means that basically what we're teaching people is how to fail faster. They're still going to fail, but we're going to do it quicker. That's a great result there, Agile community. And my fear is that the Agilistas are somewhat maybe killing the planet, because the more features that we're delivering, the more it costs to build them, the more resources it takes, not only to build them, but to maintain them. So if you think about all those poor servers using all the energy, we are making the glaciers melt more by doing this. Well done, Agilista community. So let's put another piece to the loop. I think we're a little bit allergic to the idea of doing any kind of planning. Planning was a terrible thing. But actually, it's not the planning, it's the understanding that we need to get better at. So we're going to take a lot of the lean concepts and always start with the problem, or if you're a consultant, you might want to start with the opportunity that we want to go after. What is it that people really want to solve? Like if people say, we need to do Agile, it's like, well, why? What's really going on? Oh, well, we have problems. Our code's bad quality. We're not doing it well enough. We're not getting the returns. Whatever the client says, it's usually more of a symptom level. We have to dig down to what's really going on. And this is where we do some of the deep dive stuff, which anyone's in lean startup or discovery mode. We're looking at the existing data. We're going out into the field. We're trying to really observe and understand what people are doing. After that, we can create the measurable outcomes. I'm big on making these really big and visible. But what we're saying is, hey, we're here currently. Our definition and measure of success is over here. This is what we're going to track every time we go around this right-hand loop. So, and instead of having requirements. I don't really like that word. It means something's required. It sort of gives it this importance that I don't think we have. We're actually going to have options. So things that we could invest in, we may or may not. We want to compare those. This is for the people in the sort of Agile community. You can start creating some of your stories, etc. We want to compare those. What are going to give us the highest value to reach those outcomes? And because we often don't know, this is where we're going to go into a few different modes and deliver. Sometimes we're doing a little bit of research, what I call the minimal viable amount of research. What's the smallest amount to give us some data? We might be doing a probe, right? People are really good at product management. The data's there to help guide us, but you often just make these gut feel, instinctual, we need to try this out. So we're going to be running a probe to see what is it we don't have any idea about. We're going to get some information back. We might be running experiments, so being a little more methodical, and we might actually implement something if we feel like it's worth the investment. Once we do that, we come back and see this arrow over here. We want to actually say, okay, it's great we delivered all these outputs, but did we actually move that needle? Did we actually meet some outcomes? Otherwise, what's the point? Then we go back into this adapt curve. Adapt's interesting, because sometimes you're going, hey, we're getting good results, we're going to keep delivering stuff, or you know what, none of that worked. We're going to go back over here and discover more. And this is why it's an infinity loop. The real way the stuff works, it's like a racing track. Cars are going around the loop and discovering things on the left-hand side. We're delivering and getting information and learning on the right, and we're constantly doing that, right? So I'll give you a couple of examples of this. This is just a simple canvas. We've been on canvases at the moment, aren't we? And this one was based on a client of ours who came to us and said, I've obfuscated it because they're a client, but if we take it as something like a big e-commerce website that we're pretty familiar with, and they said, hey, we've got this problem that we're losing conversions, we're not getting as many as we'd like, and we need you to come in and help. So they were really super siloed. So within the conversion funnel, so let's say even if you wanted to buy a book or something on Amazon, you go through like marketing offers. You could buy 2 of these books, get a third one free. You would go through the whole transaction system. You would go through all the kind of e-commerce engine, and you would sort of pop out the other side. And because they had separate teams, they were all optimizing for their own area, and they weren't really looking at the holistic flow. So this is a pretty simple one. We ran a workshop, and their problem or opportunity was this high rate of abandonment by customers. Often when we do this, we make it pretty plain English, but I do try to quantify a lot. I actually put up a couple of blog posts today all about how to quantify and get into the measurement of value. But we'll keep it pretty simple. Theirs was that 86% of users abandoned checkout. They found that each 1% conversion was worth many millions per year for this company. They found that they had some interesting things going on that we found just from looking at the data quickly, which was the bounce rates were incredibly high when the page load took more than 3 seconds. We got a drop off. More than 4 seconds, it was history, right? So we knew that, and some of the pages took 8 seconds to load. People furthest from the data center, which actually turned out that the data center was in Luxembourg in Europe, the highest spenders were actually Australians, and you guys were furthest from the data center. So something was going on there. We also, in parallel, had all sorts of usability issues. What I've found over and over and over again of doing this stuff is I get handed huge kind of what I call the guest lists. We call them product backlogs. But there are all these wishes and shiny objects from the executive team, and they're kind of the sexy, cool features, but actually those ones aren't ever where the value is. They're typically performance and usability things that we do. And this is where it's actually really easy to make money. So we had all sorts of data from, customer service saying our product was hard to use. So the top level outcome was to increase the amount of conversions, pretty simple. Another one was to increase revenue by 40+ million annually. The way we worked that number out is we worked out that other similar competitors were getting between 25 and 30% conversions, so we were pretty low. We knew that there was quite a lot we could do pretty simply. One of the ways that we thought we could maybe meet that high-level outcome was to decrease page load times, and we started to visualize this stuff. So putting the stuff into arrows is actually really good. It's the way that we report things to the executive teams too, because they like pictures. No one reads anymore, it turns out. And so this is where everybody jumps into solutions very quickly. Often as soon as you say, people in Australia have problems, we get everybody going, oh, I know what the problem is. So the first person said, well, it's clear what we need to do is set up a new data center in Sydney. I'm like, well, it could be expensive, but maybe. Someone else said, well, it's definitely the network, you know, all those undersea cables, there's something going on, we've got to fix the network. Someone else said, oh, well, why don't we just maybe compress some of the images, maybe that'll do it. It's like, oh, that's too simple, shut up. And we also had things around improving page flows. We do some sort of options weighing, so we look at them and say, where is the value to the risk to the cost that we're going to get back? Often you'll see question marks all over the place, and this is actually being honest about what we don't know. So at this point, instead of going, well, let's just implement stuff, and again, the Agilistas, we're all guilty of doing that at times, we kind of hold ourselves back. What we're trying to do is gain information rapidly. So for example, we might run a network trace route, right? That's a little research activity. Is there actually a problem or not? We might find out why customers are leaving. There could be some humanistic issues. We might do a data center test. Maybe we put one server in Sydney and we divert 0.005% of our users so we can get some data back on that. And we might even, what are we doing? Simplify the pages, etc. So there can be lots of things that we're putting out there. And these are like simple probes to get the information. And even implements, because that might be so low risk, why don't we just push it out the door? What was interesting is we have to measure at multiple levels. So for this one, we actually decreased the page load time. Again, it was kind of interesting. We did a lot of stuff, and it got us maybe, you could get to 5 seconds, but because it was so binary, if we didn't get to 4 or less, it was really irrelevant. We also had to check, because we have a hypothesis by decreasing page load times we'll get more conversions, but again, you have to actually run those numbers, otherwise why bother doing it? And after that, we're looking at how much of this do we deliver, because there might be no point going to 2.9 seconds, which costs a lot of money, if we don't do that, right? Actually, that reminds me of a story. We went into a company, my husband went on holiday, and we came back. They were working on this huge failover plan, and everybody's super busy, and he looks and he's like, why are we doing it? And they said, because the sales guy sold it. And he's like, oh, okay, well, I'll go find him. Finds a sales guy who's really aggressive saying, no, you have to do it. We've got to sign contract. My husband said, oh, yeah, that's fine. It's fine. But how much is the contract worth? And the guy's like, it's worth $120,000, and we've got to get to 99.99% uptime. My husband's like, oh, that sounds really great. He said, by the way, did the team tell you how much this is going to cost to deliver? And they said, no. He's like, that's going to cost $6.8 million. And the guy's like, oh. Then my husband said, what does the client really need to do? Let's talk to them. So he rings them up and he said, hey, what happens if between, say, 12 and 2 a.m. the system's not running? Oh, that's fine. We usually leave the office by 7 o'clock anyway, every day. So because no one had been really clear about things like the actual outcomes, we were building so much that it was going to just cost a lot to get to that 99.4 lines uptime. We didn't really need to. So in this example, we went and you get a choice. Did we get the results that it's actually worth implementing that data center? Is it worth implementing the network fix? Do we design a new payment page? And we'll flip back around if none of those are giving us the answers, and we'll keep trying out new things. So this one, pretty simple, right? You're like, well, it's e-commerce, we all know that stuff. This is an area that I care a lot about, because I think what we should do as software people is be thinking about where can we actually make a difference in the world. One of the areas we can do that is in healthcare, because we can save lives. So I started getting really interested because I had 3 different clients working on what they call hospital-acquired infection rates. Because hospital-acquired infections, so the bacteria you get when you go into a hospital, is one of the leading causes of death in the US. It kills more people than breast cancer, car crashes, AIDS, poisoning, suicide, and homicide per year, more than all of those things combined. In fact, it's so dangerous that it's way more dangerous than base jumping. So the next time you're sort of going, should I go to hospital today, base jump? Definitely base jump. Turns out going to hospital can be 10 times more dangerous, right? So this is crazy stuff. The fact that we're sick, we go into hospital, we might kill ourselves. In fact, one of the leading infectious diseases guys I was speaking to recently, I said, what do you do about this problem? It's terrible. And he went, oh, it's easy, just don't go to hospital. Okay, nice to know. So when we dig into this, we try to understand the problem. And again, it's not actually the outcome that matters so much. It's really valuable to have an outcome. But what it is the understanding that leads to that outcome that's really important. That's why we have to go through this little flow. So it turns out that we get people in the hospitals who bring in the infections. And in fact, some hospitals, to make more money, have opened up their outpatient sort of emergency areas. So they're getting more patients in, and again, more infections. We have the problem that the waste will spread throughout the hospital, and if that's not disposed of well, it'll get through there. There's the big problem of the bacteria that all the hospital staff has on their hands, and the fact that, for some reason, they're not washing their hands. I think they say, well, generously, 40% of the hospital staff actually have really washed their hands correctly. That was when they actually had trackers to measure it. When they automated that, it turned out about only 10% of them actually washed their hands. So next time you're in hospital, turn around and say, hey, did you actually wash your hands? Just asking. So 1.7 million hospital-acquired infections in the US every year, which causes 99,000 deaths. Now, they're kind of slightly different metrics. This is a very simplified version of this problem, but the things that kill people aren't necessarily the same bacteria that causes the infection rates. So when we did this, we want to get the hospital staff and the people who design all the patient records, et cetera, in to start fixing this. So you might have options. Well, we can isolate patients, we can dispose of waste better, we can do better hand hygiene, et cetera. And we'll run experiments. So we will actually go in and run a hand hygiene experiment. This is a hospital in Melbourne, and they started doing this stuff and working with the nurses. Simon Small gave a TED talk about it. And when they asked the nurses to figure out what was going on, why don't you wash your hands, turned out that the devices they used didn't even work. So the pumps were actually broken. By redesigning those alone, they got the infection rate up much higher. So they'll be measuring, did we actually move that needle on the hand hygiene? And if we did we actually decrease infection rates? Did we decrease deaths? There was an interesting story with one of the Freakonomics authors, and he talked about having the same problem. They went into a hospital, and this is where you have to do multiple loops in the mobius loop, because what they found is they isolated this problem that none of the doctors were washing their hands, and it was a perception behavioral problem. They thought that 79% of them thought they washed their hands all the time, and when the nurse spies actually took notes, turned out it was only 9% of them. So they tried everything. They'd even gone into giving them Starbucks cards if they washed their hands, which meant that every time the tracker came through the building, all the doctors earning ridiculous salaries per year were running over, washing their hands just to get a little cheap Starbucks card. But it still didn't bring the rates up. The one thing they did after multiple experiments, because you don't get the stuff right at the same time, was they got the doctors put their hand in the petri dish, cultivated the bacteria for a week, then they turned it into a visual screensaver, and they flashed this all over the hospital. And that actually brought the hand washing way up. I think it was over 80%. Yeah. Kind of interesting. No, I won't go there at the moment. So a couple of things that seem to be in our way. Whenever I talk about this, people go, yeah, it makes total sense. We should all be doing this stuff. And then I get hit with things like, well, the legal contracts we use are very broken for doing this. Who thinks that they use great legal contracts for Agile work at the moment? Anybody? This gets back into the measures again. So if you look at what we measure in contracts, well, let's look at what we charge for. That's probably the best way to do it. And you get that fixed price plus fixed scope. So what you're really measuring, oh, it's not on the screen. Wow, that was an amazing drawing you're missing. Thank you. There you go. So we're measuring the outputs again. And so many people at the moment are saying, well, we deliver everything in the contract, but actually the customer's unhappy, we know it's not the right solution, we've killed ourselves to do it, and it's a really bad system. And with the contracts, of course, we lock out the ability to change. So what we do is we put in the notion of change requests, which anyone in the consulting world knows those are simply a license to print money. That doesn't work so well. Or we do time and materials. So we say we'll burn a certain amount of time, and for that you'll get this wonderful, beautiful package at the end of it. So again, all of these things incentivize the wrong behaviors. Let's take more time to build it. Let's build more outputs. So to deal with this, we should be moving towards what we call an outcome-driven contract. Now, this is really the idea of a minimal viable contract. So what you want to do is put as little in the framework agreement or your terms and services as possible. For example, you put your IP and your warranties. And don't put anything about scope in there, because as soon as you do, as soon as you want to change, you have to go back through a really long, slow, painful flow, and you have to go back to the lawyers, which costs a lot of money. So instead of having these bizarre charging models, we're going to actually try to figure out what are the target outcomes that we want to achieve. By simply doing that alone, you turn the contract from a really reactive document into something that's actually pretty proactive. How do we understand what's in the customer's minds? And the best way of doing that is being really clear about the outcomes. So we call this a statement of target outcome instead of a statement of work. And within there, we will make it pretty flexible. So when you start this stuff, you might say, well, if we achieve that whole target outcome, great, you'll get this payment. If you do it 2 days in, excellent. You get that payment early. Everybody's happy. If you get some of the way there, well, if you get half the way there, you can get some of that money. And if you're worried about risk, or it's a new thing for you, which most people are, most people I know are doing at most 40% outcome payments, then you might do things like, we'll do a basic time and materials or a fixed price for this amount of time, then there'll be some amount tied to outcomes, right? As long as you've got simple exit clauses, it's very easy for the client to get into this and for you. So this is the way we actually find, we've got some people experimenting with these. I spoke to some Italian guys the other day, and they said it's really interesting. The lawyer said we usually start with these like at least 30-page contracts, and you're really reluctant to get rid of all the clauses. Ours, we try to fit on one page, like the minimal viable, what's the least amount of clauses. The lawyer I work with was a bit horrified when I made her do that. Anyway, we got there. And then they said, so then we really had to think about what were the clauses we added on. So the clauses we add on in Italy is fascinating. So if you go to court in Italy, it turns out it takes many, many years. It's extremely expensive and painful. So they wrote in clauses that if something goes wrong, they will sit down and talk about it. If that doesn't work, they will get external mediation, but they have a clause that they are never allowed to go to court no matter what. Imagine that. How crazy is that? And he said it completely changed the dynamic because both they and the customer are constantly talking about what are the outcomes, are they meeting them, and if you're not happy, tell us because, hey, you can't go to court, neither can we, so we need you to sit down and sort it out. So it's changing our fundamental thinking all the way through from the way that we measure things in our organization, the way we incentivize it, etc. I'm also finding that people say, well, management will never go for it, but I'm finding it's exactly the opposite. So when I went in to run a workshop with that team who wanted to use the story writing, we went in and by coming up with the outcomes, while we're doing it, I was sort of looking at it, one of the product managers, and we sort of went, something's going on with this data. Hey, there seems to be a big opportunity to fix this problem. Jamie went off, looked at the data the next day, and he sends me a little Skype message. He said, you were exactly right. We pushed this change. We're already getting the measurements in, and this is going to save us £12 million over the next year. And he said, you know, the interesting thing is that was nowhere on our product backlog. He said, it's actually, our product backlog has a new home. It's called the rubbish bin. He said, because as soon as you start mapping all the outcomes, you realize that most stuff that you're building has no correlation at all, and it's a lot of waste that's come in. And so then the next week I go in to see the VP of company who was saying, we need some sort of agile coaches. Have you got anybody? And he looked at my proposal and went, your guys are really expensive. And I went, well, I've got really cheap people. They're really useless, but you can have those. And he said, no, but why are you so expensive? And I went, well, do you know what happened last week? Have you spoken to Jamie? He went, no. And when I told him, The VP's looking at me and he's got the contract in front of him and he just signs it. And I had this moment of absolute clarity that I'm the biggest idiot in the world. Why am I the biggest idiot in the world? Other than the obvious blonde, but why? What's that? Thank you. Here I am with this brilliant outcomes-based contract. And what I should have said, and I said this to him, I was like, oh, I should have done 10% of the upside. And he went, you should have, he said, because I would have signed that. I'm not going to do it now, but, you know. And I'm like, I could have made 1.2 million in 3 days' work, right? This is nirvana for all consultants out there. This is what we aspire to. And everything I do, when I was writing up blog posts, I kind of worked out what I'd saved for companies over the last year, and it's like, one of them was like 100 million per year I've saved them. And that was simply through going through this outcomes-based work, doing things like to bring down their deployment time. Like one company, as soon as we went in and we said, well, why does it take you so long to deploy stuff? Turned out they had a 2-month bottleneck where they had to write all the documentation. And I said, well, why don't you paralyze it, you know, have the documentation writers come to the front of the line, work with the teams, do it iteratively. And they said, oh no, documentation writers are really expensive. And I was like, really? How much? And it was like, whatever, 100 grand, so probably 200 grand a year, fully burdened with holidays, etc., added in there. And so back of the napkin, I sit there and I went, well, give me the price of your average project per year. Okay, whatever that was. I think it turned out to be something like, for them, 330,000 per month, right? So what we did is we multiplied that by the number of projects that they had going through, or product launches. We found out, long story short, that if we, even with the cost of extra documentation writers, there was going to be something like 3.8 million that we could save by simply employing more documentation writers. And that we did within 10 minutes of being in a workshop. So suddenly, one of the managers at the back of the room, he's just like, oh, this is really interesting. I think we need to talk to management now. So this is the stuff they really care about. I mean, not all value is quantified, but I'd find most of the industry, that's what it's really all about. And the other thing that's really interesting is who else is doing this stuff. So when I was at the TED conference, one last year in Edinburgh, there was a guy called Toby Eccles presenting. So we got talking. And what he does is something called social impact bonds. So there's a big problem with government expenditure and massive waste, right? Toby's a really smart guy. He came out of, I think, finance and hedge funds. And he realized that we weren't solving these social problems. He wanted to do something about it. So he set up this fund. So what happens is private investors will go and put some money in, and they will go to the government and say, look, we're going to try and fix one of these social problems, for example, recidivism in prisons. So for prisoners, repeat offender rates are very high. So people who've had a previous offence, they come out of prison, they have a 63% chance of reoffending again. It costs a lot of money, the prisons, the social impact, etc. And he said, if we get that 10%, decrease that number by 10% or more, we'll take a cut of that. Right? So they're doing, again, another incentive bonus for the outcomes. And when they looked at the problem, most people had come in and, meaning well, had done things like, let's make them learn woodwork so they can come out and make toys. And they had all these well-meaning people doing all of these projects that cost a lot of money. Toby instead said, well, why are these guys offending, right? Let's do a deep dive into that. Turned out that when they come out of prison, they've got 49 pounds in their pocket. No one's there to meet them, so they go and stay at their friend's place. They don't know how to get on welfare. They need money. They go to commit the next crime, and the whole cycle begins again. Simply by having someone go and meet the prisoner at the prison, take them out, get them into a halfway home, get them signed up on welfare, they brought this number down a lot. And they were looking at things like abused children and all these really important things. So this idea that we can use it for social good, you know, Toby, when I talked to him, he said, you know, I said, oh, everyone says it's so hard to measure outcomes. And he thinks it's a huge joke. He's like, you guys get such quick feedback. He said, our stuff takes many years. He said, but it's completely changing the industry because this is the way we need to think about things. What's the shortest path to meet that outcome? So whenever we're doing things, just step back a little bit and ask the question, why are we doing it? What's the real purpose? Instead of trying to go that much faster or even building super quality code for completely the wrong thing. Let's do something that will help us meet the outcomes with as least work as possible, and ultimately to make a really big difference in everything we do. Thank you.